And Boris Johnson says he wants a snap election to help ensure that Britain's divorce from the European Union happens. The British Prime Minister said today that he wants Parliament to approve a general election on December 12th. That is beyond the current Brexit deadline of the end of the month. MPs must vote on Johnson's election measure, but passage in the fractured Parliament is far from guaranteed. Johnson told Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn that a deal could still get passed if the opposition backs the election call. And he says that if the Conservative Party wins a majority, his government will ratify the Brexit deal unless it is passed earlier. The House of Commons will debate the election motion on Monday. Pollster and analyst Joe Twyman has joined us throughout this Brexit saga. He is the co-founder and director of Delta Poll UK and is in London. Joe, first of all, what is going on? You know, where are we now in terms of an election and the Brexit saga?
Well, we don't know for sure because there are a lot of details that remain unclear. What we do know is that Boris Johnson has made it clear that he wants his Brexit bill to go through. He has asked the EU for an extension, and the suggestion is that that extension could be granted until February. But Boris Johnson has been very clear that he does not want to extend that far, and so he has made debate on the Brexit bill in Parliament contingent on the general election being granted for December the 12th. And so the debate will take place on Monday about whether that is to occur or not. But in order for a general election to be called, two-thirds of the House of Commons must vote in favour of it. A simple majority is not enough.
So tell me about that. Do you think that Boris Johnson will get two-thirds of the Commons voting in favour of a snap election?
I think it's possible, but I think it's far from guaranteed. In order for it to happen, both Labour and the Conservatives have to be united behind the desire for an election. There are suggestions that Labour is far from happy about calling an election while they rest so far behind in the polls. And then there are independent MPs, Scottish nationalist MPs, and MPs from Northern Ireland, and it's unclear how they will vote. It's really uncertain at the moment, but this is simply the latest of uncertainties that we have had to experience over the last few days, weeks, and indeed months and years.
What about the people? How do you think this will go over with the general public, just this latest chapter in this seemingly endless drama?
I think there will be few people who will be jumping for joy at the news of yet another general election in this country. I think if it is supported, it will be supported for partisan reasons, but I think it's highly unlikely that there'll be much in the way of emotional enthusiasm for such an event, particularly one taking place in December when it's cold, although obviously not as cold as Canada, in streets and towns and cities across Great Britain.
So what do you think this means in terms of Brexit? Do you think that this deal is, that Boris Johnson is likely to get a deal in the coming days? That seems quite unlikely. Do you think he's likely or not likely to get an election?
I think it's extraordinarily difficult to say at the moment because it has only just been announced. I imagine that Friday, Saturday and Sunday will be dominated by briefings and counter-briefings from inside and outside both of the two major parties. And by the end of the weekend, we should have a better idea of where we are on the election vote. And of course, the vote itself on the election will then decide exactly what happens with Brexit next, whether the time will be granted for additional scrutiny of the bill or whether the government will decide to bring that forward. But exactly how much constitutional room the government has in that respect is similarly unclear. These are uncharted constitutional waters for us in this country, and it's really difficult to see an obvious outcome at this stage. Various things could happen, but it's unclear if any of them will.
What's your sense of how people in Britain are feeling about this? Because, you know, we kind of check in with you once in a while, here and there. It seems like a perpetual political crisis.
Yes, that's right. We lurch from one crisis to the next at the moment, and none of them actually seem to have an effect on the core issue at hand, specifically Brexit. Boris Johnson has previously said that he would rather die in a ditch and have his legs cut off than extend past October the 31st. and yet that appears to be exactly what he is doing. And so for 3 years now, the British public has waited to see what the politicians will decide upon in terms of the precise form of Brexit that will take place, or indeed if nothing takes place at all. And yet, 3 years later, still no decision remains. And yes, in normal times, Boris Johnson could be assured of a strong performance in the election and possibly a majority. These are far from normal times, and the influence that Brexit has on the general election and the votes that people make still means that this whole event represents an enormous gamble for the Conservatives and indeed an enormous gamble for Labour. Clearly, Boris Johnson believes, however, that that gamble is smaller than it would be to not hold a general election.
And clearly, I think we will be chatting again soon. Joe, thank you. Joe Twyman of Delta Poll in London.